Hey everyone, it is one of your co-hosts, Luke. And if you are a longtime listener and you're hearing my voice like this, you probably know that means we do not have our normally scheduled episode coming up today. And you'd be correct because, hey, there's a hurricane bearing down right on my house, me and my family here in Florida. And so we are fleeing up the ways to the wonderful city of Atlanta, my home, repping the A as always. And yeah, we're going up there. We're gonna stay for a few days, and not have our power knocked out and get flooded in and all that. So yeah, as you might have guessed, that means that me and Eleanor could not record a normally scheduled episode this week. Unfortunately, that's just circumstances. I really wish climate change wasn't doing this to us, but we take it as it comes. And so since we couldn't record an episode, we didn't really want to skip, so we decided to unlock one of our bonus episodes. This is our bonus episodes, we do 2 a month over on Patreon, patreon.com/WNSDpod, just $5 a month. You guys know, check it out. Yeah, and we're unlocking our the first episode in our bonus. The first episode in our book club series on The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. It's our introduction, so you could check that out. You get to see, what all this is about. What the setting is, who Umberto Eco is, why this novel is considered so important and is so well beloved and everything like that. And yeah, if you like that, then you can subscribe and check out more. We got more book club series in the future. We've done them on the Silmarillion and Dante's Inferno, and those are both awesome. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this. We have a lot of fun with it. We really enjoy this stuff, and we think you would too. So yeah, check it out. If you are not a patron, and if you want to be one, you know what to do. But yeah, thank y'all so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with the conclusion of our series, of our Day in the Life series. We're going to bounce around to a few things: a day in the life of like an archer, a lady in waiting, construction worker, stuff like that. And then for our bonus episode, we are actually going to we're going to be very heretical this time. We're going to talk about a way in which we are actually very, very, very fucking different. And that way is irony and ironic detachment and postmodernism and post-irony. Yeah, we're going to talk about that next time, and it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah. You guys, thanks for listening. Just wanted to leave you this note, so you would know what was going on. We'll be back next week with the regular schedule. But in the meantime, enjoy the intro music and then the intro to the podcast. You get 2 intros today, 2 intros for the price of 1. All right, thanks everyone. Bye. Hello, and welcome back to We're Not So Different, a podcast about how weather's really, really fucking scary.
It is.
And cool and scary. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. It's our first episode for May of 2024, and the first episode in our book club series on The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. But first, a patron follow-up from the last bonus episode on European medievalism in Japanese art. We had a couple of replies I wanted to highlight here. First, Ted wanted me to mention another cultural antecedent of dark fantasy in the form of Fafhard and the Grey Mouser. I've never actually heard those pronounced, so
I never heard of it, so I was like, "Oh, I'm okay. Learning. I'm listening and learning."
Yep. I hear you. I'm listening. Yeah. And these are characters created by author Fritz Lieber in the mid-30s and intended to be sword and sorcery heroes who are reminiscent of Conan the Barbarian and Tarzan, but were more true to how people are in real life. They also predate Lord of the Rings by a few years. Ted also noted that Lieber even created a precursor tabletop war game featuring the characters in the 30s, and while that game was not successful at the time, the makers later turned it into a more classic board game that was released in the 70s, and later still, Dungeons & Dragons licensed the characters and setting from Lieber to include them in supplemental stories in the 80s. I will admit I had vaguely heard of these characters from the D&D stories, but hadn't looked them up any real way, so yeah, cool, thank you for the info. Next, Gilded Dragon noted an incredible gaffe on my part, which is that Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series is a work of high fantasy that is explicitly not European medievalist.
That's true.
This is absolutely correct.
It's true, yeah.
Le Guin said that her characters were meant to be explicitly non-European and were described as being brown-skinned, seafaring people who lived on a series of archipelagos. In my meager defense, I will say that despite her protestations to the medievalist vibe, as she meant her world to be more classical or ancient in nature, a lot of her influences from Tolkien do give the pastoral vibe that makes people think it's medievalist in nature. Also, the Goro Miyazaki directed Tales of Earthsea is medievalist because it was combined with elements taken from another work that was medievalist in tone and appearance. So yeah, thus, kind of quasi-medievalist, even if Le Guin didn't mean it as such. However, it is certainly not European in any way, shape, or form. Sorry about that. But thanks for the comments. We appreciate them. And yeah, we'll highlight more in the future.
Yeah, love you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So how does one introduce Umberto Eco's 1980 debut novel and magnum opus, The Name of the Rose? Well, let's start with a genre. That should be simple enough. The Name of the Rose is a murder mystery whodunit set in a snowy Italian monastery in 1327. It's essentially as though Eco transported Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and Watson characters back in time, made them monks, and had them perform an investigation against the backdrop of the Middle Ages instead of Victorian England. But murder mystery alone doesn't do it justice because there's far more here. Umberto Eco was a professor of medievalism and semiotics, which is the study of sign processes and how meaning is communicated, if you, like me, didn't know specifically. So it just couldn't be that simple. There had to be more to it than that. And indeed there is. The Name of the Rose is also a meticulously researched work of medievalist historical fiction. Eco went to great pains to present a very historically accurate version of medieval life in an Italian monastery down to the finest details. His standards were so exacting that the inaccuracies almost stand out like sore thumbs, a fact that has led many literary scholars to argue that the handful of inaccuracies or apocryphal mentions in the book were intentionally included by the author as part of a broader literary conceit. It's not just the attention. And if you think that's where the rabbit hole goes on the literary criticism here, hoo boy, do I have news for you. But it's not just the attention paid to things like the types of food monks would have consumed or the fabric that they would have used in their habits. The book is extremely concerned with the historical setting of this historical fiction. The Name of the Rose pays close attention to the contradictions of the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire that were slowly mounting in the early 14th century, many of which would prove unresolvable for the newly stagnating empire and church. The early 1300s is when the church made a series of bungles, most of which were self-inflicted, that would have cascading consequences and contributed to the slow but very real erosion of the church's ecclesiastical authority and the eventual fracturing of Europe's medieval social order. Just 2 decades before the events of the Name of the Rose, the papacy had moved to Avignon, creating a deep rift within Christendom. The tricky question of apostolic poverty in clerical orders was on the lips of every clergyman and monk, thanks to the rise of the spiritual Franciscans, aka the Fraticelli, and the idea of the absolute poverty of Christ. And they weren't just having boring debates. Competing papal bulls were propagated and ignored as needed over the years. And 4 spiritual Franciscan monks had been burned for heresy in Avignon just 9 years before The Name of the Rose begins. The atmosphere of fear, anxiety, and mistrust that these events created is central to the plot and even the main motivating factor for certain characters. In fact, the controversy over apostolic poverty is so central to the book that one of the main set pieces is a large theological debate on the subject. And I know you might groan at that, but yeah, it's really good, actually.
It's actually a good thing? Yeah.
Yeah. In this way, the novel is both a historical retrospective that details the many political and social upheavals facing Europe and the Holy Roman Empire at the beginning of the 14th century, and an extended discourse on the mounting theological problems that shook Catholicism to its core and precipitated the Reformation. Also, Caesaropapism and anti-popes are back in a big way, baby. Woo! Bow, bow, bow. We got people fighting over shit. However, perhaps more than anything else, The Name of the Rose is a not-so-subtle work of postmodernist irony that rewards the careful reader as every major theme and plot development is undercut or in some way subverted. Eco takes the medievalism he so tenderly crafted and obviously loved, and then throws in anachronistic references to future philosophers and incorrectly attributed quotes in Latin. Or incorrectly spelled quotes in Latin. Such blatant mistakes might be expected from a first-year student's term paper, but when flowing from the pen of a world-renowned postmodernist writer and academic, they are far more likely to be ironic inclusions, especially since Eco goes to great lengths to draw attention to them. No, really, there's a 40-page postscript that he wrote that explains different ways in which the book can be read or interpreted. He's not really trying to hide any of it. Moreover, the solution to the mystery at the heart of the story is ironic, as it hinges on the contents of Aristotle's Comedy, the second book from his collection Poetics, which the monastery has on hand, naturally. The irony here being that Aristotle's book on comedy has been completely lost to time since antiquity, a well-known fact in philosophical and certain historical circles. Even the conclusion, which you won't spoil just yet, is so thoroughly ironic and subversive to the pretenses of the book that it would work just fine as the ending to a more cynical Golden Era Simpsons episode where Marge says something like, "It's an ending, that's enough," when asked what they learned. So what does this all make The Name of the Rose? Well, it's fantastic, obviously, but I honestly don't know genre-wise. Maybe it's a medievalist murder mystery puzzle box historical fiction philosophical tone with postmodernist and Catholic overtones. In the end, who really knows how to categorize it, but it also doesn't really seem to have mattered very much to anyone, despite being well over 500 pages long, including a prologue, a note, a preface, an epilogue, and a postscript, and seemingly being about nothing and everything simultaneously. The Name of the Rose is one of the best-selling books of all time. As of late 2023, it is one of only 29 books ever published to sell more than 50 million copies.
Jesus
50
Christ.
million. Further, it received numerous literary awards, was named one of the 100 greatest novels ever written, and has been the subject of numerous excellent adaptations. So it seems that both critics and the general public agree The Name of the Rose is great, no matter what genre it is, and we're going to find out why as we dive into this book club series together. In addition to this introduction, this series will last either 6 or 7 total episodes and will likely include some more bonus stuff along the way that we'll talk about later. So, we don't know what genre it is. But, if we're introducing the book, and maybe you're not familiar, you haven't started your read, or, maybe you read it a long time ago and, kind of forgot. I'm just going to give a very high-level summary so we're all on the same page. After that, we'll introduce the author, Umberto Eco, then have a primer on liturgical hours because they are important to the understanding of the story. Mm-hmm. Then go through a brief refresher on the historical background of Italy, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Church in the early 14th century and why that's so important here. And lastly, there's not much geography here, but I get a little bit. We talk through the layout of Eco's fictional abbey and, more importantly, its maze-like library within the fortified tower known as the Aedificium. So yeah, broad strokes. The Name of the Rose. If you're totally unfamiliar with the book, here's a bare bones summary, just so you know what we're discussing. Our protagonist, a monk named Adso of Milk, and his master, a former inquisitor named William of Baskerville, travel to a sleepy Italian abbey in late November in the year 1327. William has been sent to mediate a theological dispute on the issue of apostolic poverty and determine if heresy is afoot, while Adso is there to narrate the story for us. However, these doctrinal questions soon become secondary as several strange deaths are reported around the abbey, and William is tasked by the abbot with figuring out who done it. In the process, he and Adso will unravel the other mysteries of the abbey and its inhabitants, complete a sprawling investigation in just 7 days, and maybe even piece together what happened. There's obviously so much more to it, but that's a good framework for it right now. Eleanor, what do you like most about The Name of the Rose? What part of this resonates the most with you?
This is my shit. Like, the thing is, it's quite a funny thing, right? Because, Eco is a fellow medievalist, but he's not a 14th. I'm a 14th century bitch. Like,
yeah, he's a Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah. So he's more like 13th century, really. Like, I'm a 14th century type bitch. Like, these are my fucking guys that are like getting mentioned in the background and stuff. And this is like my bread and butter. So it's quite funny because. So I'm rereading it. Like, I've read it before, as all medievalists have done. But I'm doing it again just to make sure that I was up on everything. And it's quite funny because I decided to get it out of the library. And by I got it out of the library, I mean I asked Blair to go do it because I was in France or something. He found it in the mystery section. It was in the murder mystery section. and which sparked this huge debate between us. We were like, well, what is it? And I'm like, well, I think about it as historical fiction. Right? Like, that's what it is to me, is that like it's a fiction work, but the thing that's important about it is the history. And I would have thought that, so Blair had come home and been like, what section do you think I found it in? And I was like, fiction. And he was like, no. And I was like, oh, it hasn't made it to the classics already? I could completely understand why it would be in like the classics section. And he's like, nope, murder mystery. And I was like, shit, I mean, I guess, yeah, but it's just not how I think about it, right? Because the way that I think about it is, here is a plot that is set with my guys. Right.
Yeah.
And like, and I just I'd sort of forgotten about that. But like, when they're shit talking Pope John and they're like, oh, the Holy Emperor Louis. And I'm like, fucking Ludwig of Bavaria sucks. Like, but it is like, it's very funny, like how he's created these characters that would believe these things. And so for me, it's quite funny because I spend so much time thinking about what this world might be like. So to be given something on a plate that does that, it's just like ideal for me. Like, I mean, it's kind of like being inside my head, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah. He's the detail in it is astounding. Like, I like less so of like the less so of the imagery he describes, because he's not like a Tolkien in that way. Tolkien was very obsessed with, imagery and things like that. And Dante was, to a certain extent, he would describe some of the architecture and stuff like that in the Inferno. But, Eco is not here for that. He appears to be here for like an extremely, extremely extensive breakdown of like political, social, cultural factors that affected, Italy, all of Europe, but especially Central Europe and Italy. Yeah. In the first 3 or 4 decades of the 14th century. And it's just like I'll be honest, the specificity of it is delightful to me. Like, cool. I don't know. I mean, I don't, I know a lot of these characters are, or a lot of who the people they're talking about are, from the show and all the stuff we've done. But like, it reminds me, and I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. I do not consider myself an equal of Umberto Eco, especially not for a
Neither
stupid
do I.
podcast I
Yeah,
did.
you know.
But like the podcast that I did, People's History of the Republic, is kind of like this because it's just like hyper specific on something. Because like if you're just looking back at history and you're like, you know, when am I going to write about, you know, and you're like, okay, I'm going to write about the 14th century. Well, you're like, all right, you're going to write about the Black Death. Nope, going to be before that. Okay.
Yes.
Or, you know, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm going to do like the 100 Years' War. Like, nope, but, you know,
Italy.
right
yeah.
before that, and not in the same location. You're like, the fall of the break apart of the Mongol Empire following the death of Kublai Khan, and like, nope, we're not doing any of that shit. It's monks in Italy, and they're really, really, really fucking pissed about
Spiritual poverty.
apostolic poverty, and to a lesser extent, the Pope moving to France. Like, and it's just like that specificity is just like so fun.
Yeah.
To me, like, because it's not like you don't get to learn about, like, it's something that I think we do a lot, or I try to do a lot on the show, is like you don't get to learn about this elsewhere. Like, you, like, if you learn about it, you know, like there's crisis in the 14th century, the Avignon papacy, you know, Caesaropapism, all that kind of stuff. But like this is like fundamentally either, you know, he just hyper fixated on this one thing, or he just had this insane interest in it. Like, I can't imagine how you would do this without having like that kind of interest in it, because to be able to put together something this methodically written and done without that is just,
Yeah.
it's insane to, like, I can't imagine it. It doesn't seem possible to me.
Yeah, I don't know how like an interested amateur would do this. For example,
yes. Because like, okay, I could write a history book. I could it wouldn't be great. It would be copying off of a lot of stuff, but I could do it. Like, you know, and I could do it about some, you know, vague stuff that I know a decent enough about, enough to kind of like, you know, get it out. But this is not that. This is not a guy who read the dictionary or who read Wikipedia or whatever. This is like,
Yeah, this is a guy who sat down and fucking thought about it, right? And he's got a clear idea of what the world, maybe not so much looks like, right? Which is, you know, it's kind of, it's very much speaks to me, as I say, because, you know, like obviously as a social historian, I feel like I've got a really good idea about what the Middle Ages feels like. I suppose is the thing to say. It's like I've got an idea of, I think, like how people would react to things, the stuff that they would be talking about, the way that they would feel about various political actions. You know, like the stuff that makes them tick is the thing that I feel like I've sort of got. I'm not exactly sure what, you know, like their house looks like, or, you know, how the garden's laid out or whatever. But, you know, if I go into them, I can be like, okay, yeah. And I try really hard to hold that image in my head, you know, but the thing I'm familiar with is my weird little guys. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm super familiar with my weird little guys. And it's like, this is just full of weird little guys, and they're obsessed with the same shit that I am. And that's great for me. Right? Because like these are all the questions that I am dealing with all the time in my work. And granted, like my work is later 15th century, but it's still like mid 14th century, right? Sorry, not 15th century, 14th century. And it is kind of like, you know, I deal with Emperor Louis's successor, Charles IV. I'm dealing with like all the popes that come after. You know, everyone is obsessed with Avignon still. Millage never shuts the fuck up about Avignon and like how everybody got to come back to Rome and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you are Czech. Calm. Like, why do you care? You know, like it's, but these guys are about it. And then again, like, you know, all of my preacher guys are constantly fucking going on about apostolic poverty all the goddamn time. Like that's their whole fucking deal. And so it's like, it's very interesting kind of to be like, oh yeah, fast forward 30 years, which is like my guys are like 30 years after this. And the way that people are still kind of thinking about this and talking about this really makes sense. So I get a great deal of delight out of that. And I do feel like there is something about being a fucking nerd-ass nerd medievalist that makes this possible. Like, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not trying to do I appreciate the Muppets on a much deeper level than you or something like that. But I do think that there is something to the training that allows us to do these things, you know. Shout out to an old Onion article headline there. God, I've got to get some fucking new references. It's like, yeah, like,
that's fine.
Aughts, Onion headlines. Anybody? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I can see how that, you know, how that would deepen like appreciation for it. And, you know, I think this is like a good segue into just talking about who Umberto Eco is before we actually get into the book. Like, you know, he's a medievalist, he's a professor of semiotics, he's a proficient writer.
Jesus, how much this man wrote.
His most famous stuff is this, another novel called Foucault's Pendulum, and then a short story called Air Fascism, where he did what he considers the like 14 points of like how you judge whether a country is becoming or a nation's becoming fascist, or, you know. And I think actually that actually inspired kind of the broader definition of what is used now, but I might be wrong about that. So like what are we to make of this guy? Because like he obviously smart, he's obviously intelligent, but he also kind of seems like he's like fucking around with the reader a little bit here. Like he's like, did you get that reference? Did you get this one? I referenced this thing. It's not kind of, you know, it's did you notice there's an anachronism?
Yeah, I feel like he's doing that. It's an interesting one, right? Because I wonder what he's doing with it when he's doing it. Because I'm like, is this like a wink and a nudge to me? Being like, see what I did there? You like that? You know, like, like, no, it's still fiction. It's still fiction. You see what I'm doing? Is it like, and in which case, if that's what he's doing, is he doing it to kind of like make it okay that he's writing fiction? Right? Because famously academics are cunts. Right. And and they're humorless, and they've never had a day of fun in their fucking lives. Right. So it's like, is this, you know, something that he's doing to be like, to catch academics out for being humorless, or is he doing it to like bring them in and be like, see, it's just fiction. We're just having a nice time. Right. Or is it just like something fun to do? And it advances the plot, and it's a work of fiction. And so sometimes you just kind of like are doing things, and it presages ideals. Like right there, it's because even when he's like, oh, here's all these different ways you can read it, I'm like, bro, homie, which I should get comfortable with, because like, you know, this being a Deleuzian podcast, as I said 8 million times, like Deleuze himself, our good friend Gilles, he was influenced by Eco. And like, and you know, so I should be open to like the possibilities and becoming other as a result of this. And yet I'm just kind of like, you know, what does it all mean? But I guess the answer is that it is a little bit choose your own adventure-y, right? Like in terms of how you want to relate to it. And maybe that's cool, right?
I think it has to be. Like, I mean, like he, like at the end, like there's like essentially like a teacher's supplement. Like if you're going to teach a class on this, you just turn to the end, you turn to the postscript, and you go, okay, like what am I looking at here? And like I will now read a couple of you know, the topic headlines. The novel as cosmological event. Let's see. Who speaks? Preterition, pace, constructing the reader. Like he has like this is the most postmodernist shit, you know, that's like possible. And he's just like, he just writes this stuff, and like on the one hand, when I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, this has to be a joke about how, like, you know, like if you don't know who John the 22nd if you don't know who Pope John the 22nd is, like, you're not going to get this joke. You're not going to understand it, and you're just going to, like, whatever. And so, like, some of it I do think is in there for academics. And then there's other stuff in there, like when he is like, when these like monks who, copy books in the scriptorum, when they go on these long-winded diatribes, and Adso is like very like specifically like, oh my god, this dude will not shut the fuck up. Can you please shut up? And like even sometimes when like Adso kind of like blanks out when William is just talking and talking and talking, and like you're just kind of like, oh yeah, you're getting on, you are like looking inward, and you are saying like, God, we really just don't shut the fuck up, do we?
Yeah,
And it's just kind of like, I think it's both, and like, I mean, I don't know how much you can tell, like, of a person's intention anyway, even if they come right out and say it, because, people might try to obscure things and there's subconscious stuff and all that. But like, it just seems to me that he kind of like threw all this together, and he was like, well, here it is. Also, there's a murder mystery in here, because like you have to have something to get like regular readers.
Oh,
because,
yeah.
Like the people who are like very interested in the goings on of the Holy Roman Empire, Pope John the 22nd and Anti-Pope Nicholas are, a very small part of the population. But the people who want to read like a cool murder mystery written by a guy who clearly is like very good at like, oral, debate techniques, kind of like he's a very good speaker, and that translates very well into his prose, and stuff like that. And, I don't know. I just kind of, kind of throw myself, throw my hands up at it and just go, I like it. I guess that's enough. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's not the refined way to think about it. But at some point, like, we've just had so many postmodern recursions on ourselves that it's like, I like it. If he was writing it to be like, ha ha, you dumbass plebs, fine, he got my ass. Good book, If he's writing to get the academics, well, he did that too, So
well, I feel like that in and of itself kind of like echoes a lot of the plot lines in the book, though, right? Which is like, what are the uses of literature? Like what is the use of how are we meant to kind of think about the uses of books, right? So there's two ways that you can do it. You could be all like, oh, well, you have to be a nerd-ass nerd nerding out, or you're not like feeling it, or you could be like, murder mystery, exactly. And like, I kind of think fundamentally, I tend to come down on the side in general of if people are reading, that's a net good. And if they're reading something and they enjoy it, it's good. And if it could be something like The Name of the Rose, where you get some good history, and I'm even happier. What I get pissed off about is shit like the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, I'm going to have to spend years getting mad at this, aren't I? Name of the Rose, fine, great.
How dare you insult the Illuminatus like that? No, I agree. And I mean, like, maybe that's how he meant it too. Or maybe, he's just like, such a pretentious Italian guy that he's, just
could be,
he, I don't know, whatever. It, at some point it just stops mattering to me. Like, like sometimes, sometimes like an author's laughing at you and you're like, yeah, you got my ass. Oh, well,
okay.
What about, okay. Thanks, I guess. So before we move on, there is a big deal made about how quote unquote historically accurate this book is. And it very much seems to be, and I don't want to get into like the specifics of it, because like I think that there, like when he originally wrote it, I think there were a couple of things that snuck in there that he didn't mean for them to, because when they did a later edited edition, he changed them. And I read this from like a translated interview on an Italian website called La Repubblica that Eco did before he passed away. And like he calls attention to like, at one point he mentions like a few seconds in the book, and they didn't measure time in seconds in the Middle Ages. And like, but like that's the level of like detail he went to. And so like as like a medievalist and as, what do you feel like, what do you make of his like unintentional or intentional historical inaccuracies in the book? Because like he goes to like great lengths to pretend that this book is based on a manuscript that the real Adso of Melk wrote, that Eco discovered in the 70s. So any inaccuracy in it would technically come from Adso, But then in the postscript, as he said, he mentions like, here are the 500 ways you can read this book, and also, here are some of the inaccuracies in it, kind of thing. Like, so what do you make of all this?
To me, it's like a ghost story. And like, obviously that's my answer to fucking everything, because I'm a noted spooky bitch. But like, how like every ghost story that you ever read, even when they're fictional, starts off by being like, here's the provenance and here's how like, it's real. Like, especially Victorian ones or early 20th century ones. It'll be the first thing that will happen is that there'll be like an attestation and a judgment of the character of the individual who's like told this story. Where they'll be like, oh, well, this person, if you're reading like an M.R. James ghost story, it'll be like, oh, he's one of the Dons at Cambridge. So you know that he's like a good person, right? And he definitely wouldn't be lying. Or if a lord or a lady is telling it, they're of the upper classes. So this is something that...
A monk told me while he was holding a Bible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we think that M.R. James ghost stories are real. Right?
Yeah.
But it gives it that certain frisson of like, understanding how it is. And I guess what it also does here is saying that this is like a manuscript that he found sets you up for like, get ready to nerd down, you fucking loser. I hope you understand, like, this is what we spend our time doing. And guess what? It is, right? And so it's kind of setting you up a little bit for, you're gonna have to come on a fucking journey, right? Get ready for liturgical hours, get ready for like all of these things. And that is going to be the way that we pin stuff on. Now, one of the things that I would say that isn't necessarily historically accurate, as someone who's like read autobiographies and memoirs and stuff from this time, is this is more detailed than you'd ordinarily get, right? Like there, when you read Abelard or you read Charles IV's autobiography, or hell, even if you read Marjorie Kemp's nonsense, right? Like, it doesn't have this level of detail, because when people are actually like writing about stuff that happened to them, they aren't like, and they were wearing this and it was this hour, but that's fine because it's fiction, right? And so what he's adding those things in order to make it work. And so like, I think it's quite funny where he's like, oh, the lovely Latin, the sweet Latin. I'm like, no one writes in Latin like this. Right. Like, it's like, it's much more stodgy. Like, I wish it was, it was this cute,
if he wrote it in a way that was that, I guess turgid or whatever, it would, like you and your fellow medievalist academics would have been the only, it would have been 50 people reading
I
it.
Wouldn't fucking read
50
it.
million.
Like, I don't want to like a busman's holiday.
You would have gotten 100 pages in and thrown that like, well, that's going in the recycling thing, or going to the donating that or whatever.
Yeah, I absolutely fucking love to spend my free time doing the exact same thing that I do for work. Yeah, sounds fucking great. No, thank you. I want to have fun.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I did. So I wanted to ask you this. So, like, how do you feel about like William of Baskerville as like kind of a man out of time almost? Like he is very. His respect for Roger Bacon is very.
I know.
Like extremely like enlightenment or stuff like that. So like. I mean, I know obviously Eco wrote him in this way because it like makes him mysterious and makes him like smart and also like very open to new ideas that other monks might not be. But like, what do you like? It seems that was very intentional to me anyway.
Yeah, he's the Gandalf.
Yeah.
And I think that if what we're doing is we're creating a world, the boundaries of which are medieval theology, And like that is, and this is the world that we understand it to be. If someone's going to be magic, they have to be a science dude.
They have to be an alchemist.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Get me Roger Bacon.
Exactly.
Get me Hermes Trismegistus
Exactly.
now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like it's the you know, the Obi-Wan, it's the Gandalf. It's like it is the literal mentor that we see in the hero's journey, and he's got to have something, right? And we have to therefore understand that something is in understanding and reverence for science. So it's annoying because, you know, like fucking Team Alchemy as opposed to like Team Science or whatever. But I understand why he's doing it. But it's also, you know, like a nod obviously to fucking Sherlock Holmes, right?
Yeah.
Like, so there's got to be that little bit of technicality. You know, I think the thing that I find most annoying about him is he's English. Yeah. I'm like, really? He couldn't be Italian? Okay.
Like, why did you make him English? You're Italian. Like,
he could have been anything.
It's like I'm gonna write a book and make like one of the main characters French. Like, it's just like he talks with a stodgy accent.
I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, if so, I think that we could have got that it was like an homage to Sherlock Holmes if he was from anywhere. You could have just like picked an H place. I guess there's a paucity of those in Italy, but you could have got a French guy. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I do think I will say that like I think Eco himself tries to ameliorate this somewhat because he knows very well that like at this point in the Middle Ages, science and religion came from the same place, you know, for the most part. And, you know, so like his stuff about like trusting science or trusting God isn't really like you have to choose. It's more like, you know, we don't need to be limited by the possibility, you know, God's love, intelligence, and foresight are infinite, so we don't need to think of ourselves as limited by something, you know. And there's this thing where he's talking about like you know, there are, you know, machines that can sink all the way down to the bottom of the sea, and flying machines and all this stuff, and you're just like, there's no way you actually believe this. Like you know for a fact, Umberto Eco, that that's not real. And then you read the rest of the paragraph, and William goes, and if any of those things don't exist yet, they will exist in the future because, or, you know, they might because of God's infinite love and wisdom and the understanding of man. And you're just like, oh, you got me again, you son of a...
This guy,
damn you. Yeah, anyway, it's really fun. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. But yeah, also the more I was thinking of it now, I wonder if like his whole thing in the end was like, this is what it takes to like understand, you know, to be a medievalist and to understand it. And this is kind of the level of detail, like the granularity you get to on it. And he's just like, look at this. Look at what I do for you people.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Liturgical hours. So the book takes place over the course of 7 days and is divided into 47 chapters, each of which correspond to one of the 8 liturgical hours by which Catholic monks and others live their days. The concept of liturgical hours is often very difficult to grasp because they aren't like our hours at all, even though they were technically used for telling time. Liturgical hours do not count the passage of amounts of time as modern hours do. Instead, liturgical hours indicate when prayer and or meal is supposed to begin, and they vary daily based on the rising and setting of the sun. An example will suffice. If I say it is 4 p.m., you know that 60 minutes of time have elapsed since 3 p.m., and given that the days are getting longer, sunset is 3 to 4 hours away, depending on where you live in the world. However, if something in the book occurs at prime, that means it happens just after daybreak, whenever that happens to be at a given day, time, and place in the world. Luckily, we don't need to concern ourselves with the specifics because Eco provides us with a list of liturgical hours and calculations that he used, so we know how the hours in the book roughly compare to our own modern timekeeping. Per Eco, the calculations are, quote, based on the fact that in northern Italy at the end of November the sun rises around 7:30 a.m. and sets around 4:40 p.m. End quote. So there you go. That's the specificity we're looking at. The calculations are as follows: matins, sometimes called vigile, which is between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Lauds, which is between 5 and 6 a.m. and ends at dawn. Prime, which is around 7:30 a.m. after daybreak. Terce, which is around 9 a.m. Sext, which is noon or midday. Nuns, which is between 2 to 3 p.m. Vespers, which is around 4:30 p.m. and Compline, around 6 p.m. but before 7 p.m., at which point the monks are locked into their rooms and go to bed. Eleanor, what more should we know about liturgical hours at this point?
I mean, yeah. Here's the thing. One thing to keep in mind if you're looking at this and you're like, this is fucking bonkers. You're correct. They are partially introduced because it's meant to suck dick. Sorry, brackets bad. Like that's supposed to
in
suck
this
a
case,
dick,
yes, it's a brackets bad sucking dick as opposed to the good.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's supposed to be difficult, and it's supposed to be uncomfortable, right? Because one of the things that you were meant to understand about like the life of a monk in theory is, you wear uncomfortable clothing, you eat a largely vegetarian diet, you have uncomfortable sleeping patterns, and you're doing all this for the Lord, capital T, capital L, right? So if you're looking at this and you're like, this just, then congratulations, you've got the point. Right? Like it's not meant to be a fun time where everyone is chilling. A couple things to mention, though. Them going to bed early, like the Compline thing, people did, basically, like until industrialization, people went to bed a lot earlier. Especially in the medieval period, one of the things that you would kind of do, you don't want to like fucking stay up all night, because think about all the candles you have to burn. Think about like all of the stuff that you would have to like have on fire going. And it's like, there's a danger from having that much fire going. And then also it costs fucking money, right? So it's like having candles lit all the time is an expensive thing. So no one is like staying up till midnight, right? Yeah. So like when it gets dark,
if they're writing by candlelight, it's like 8 p.m. in the winter.
Yeah,
they're
completely.
like, oh man, it's a late night.
Woo,
I gotta go.
Exactly, right? And like what you do is you rake up your ashes from the fire. You put this thing called a couvre-feu over it, which is where we get the term curfew from, that keeps them like burning slowly all night. And you go your ass to bed because it's cold.
Yeah.
And it's dark, and you just go and you sleep. And so they'd be sleeping a lot more, right? They do tend to get up also a bit before daybreak, just because they've been sleeping. And then they wake up, right? And especially if you are working on a farm or something like that, you've got like, your roosters are going to start going, your chickens are going to like go, you got to start doing stuff with your animals. Monks still kind of do some stuff with their animals, but they're like, aha, I'm not like those lazy peasants. I am up at fucking matins to like have a little sing song, right? But they're doing it to be uncomfortable. So it fits within how the world works before you have electricity, but it's still silly on top of that, on purpose.
Yeah. So look, I got a real technical question here. How the hell do they know when it's matins? Like, there's no sun to tell the time by. You can't rely on the position or the light of the moon because, as we know famously, the moon changes all the time and sometimes doesn't even show up at all. So it was just like someone up counting the time, or was it like an hourglass thing, or maybe, what are we looking at there?
I mean, it's vibes based a lot of the time.
That's fine. I just want to know if they were like, okay.
So I mean, they might.
This guy's going to count to 1,050, and when he gets there, that's matins. He's just like sitting there like 1,000, 2. Yeah.
I mean, what I will say is that we've invented clocks. Like kind of ish, right?
Right.
Like they get better later in the 14th century. So there are some and they do have hourglasses, and they very well might have an hourglass, especially like an abbey as wealthy as this one,
Right.
probably has hourglasses. So they might just be like, yeah, this is what's up. And you would probably have someone who was kind of in charge of looking after timekeeping. Yeah. So they literally might have like 7 hourglasses in a row where they're like, whoop, whoop, whoop.
Yep.
Just like, they just starting them over again. And then they're like, and that's matins, But having said,
Yeah, that works. Good for them. Yeah.
having said that, in the summer, like his compline is going to be like later, right? Like
Yes,
you
yes.
do go to bed later, and so you have to adjust it all the time in terms of what astronomical twilight is. And so it is vibes based, right? Like where you're like, oh, I don't know, like fucking,
Yeah.
And so you do your sing song or whatever. You say your masses, you do whatever it is you're doing, and then it's like it's generally understood that there'll be a certain amount of time between then and whatever the next thing is. So there is some timekeeping, but there's a lot of vibes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. That's, just always been like, what do you got? How are you guys doing this? Because clocks were in their infancy here, and I mean during the summer, you're right. Like, around the summer solstice, you're gonna have, it's gonna be light outside until nearly 8 o'clock, and it's gonna start getting light, real early in the morning.
Gets spicy up in Scandinavia and Scotland.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Okay. The historical background. It's mostly focused on a limited period of about 30 or so years, but still there's a lot. You might even remember some of it from our previous series on the main show, like historical materialism, the Holy Roman Empire, 30 Years' War, heresies, monastic orders, and more. So Eleanor, our fictional abbey is located in northwestern Italy in the Piedmont region. So in 1327, who rules this land?
Okay, so this is, and they kind of make a reference to it, this is under the control of the Emperor Louis. But this is a difficult kind of thing to say because it's like Lombardy, where Milan and stuff is, that it technically you should get that if you are the Holy Roman Emperor, but you have to go there and you have to go receive the Iron Crown of Lombardy. Same thing with the Piedmont. So the Piedmont might end up being Holy Roman Imperial land, but sometimes it isn't. At this point in time, it is. Which is why you have some very pro Louis content here. But they, especially this part of the Holy Roman Empire, like this kind of upper Italy, southeastern France, it's for debate. And it's something that emperors spend a bunch of time like going in there to be like, I'm the fucking emperor and I'm here and I rule this. God damn it. So.
This is mine.
Yeah.
Mine.
Yeah. There's rather a lot of showing up to just make it clear that you have it when you're the emperor, because everyone's got so much cash up here that you never know when it's going to kick off. Right.
Right. Yeah. So other, that's northern, northwestern Italy, which is mostly Holy Roman Imperial territory. What about just the rest of the Italian peninsula generally around this time?
Okay, so in theory, the Papal States are in effect. And the Papal States are just it's like a belt in the middle of Italy. Now, granted, this is kind of difficult because the Pope is very much in Avignon. And what is going on as a result of this is the major noble houses in Rome are kicking the fuck off. So, and two things are true, right? Like, the major noble families in Rome are able to kick the fuck off because the papacy is gone, right? But also, it's true that the papacy left because shit was so fucked up. That it was just kind of too much, right?
Yeah.
Quite interestingly, one of the things that kind of happens here later, kind of just directly after this, is you get the short-lived Roman Republic, where Cola di Rienzo was like, hey, what's up? Yeah, we're doing Rome again. And everyone's like, I don't think you are. And he's like, oh, yeah, fair enough. Right.
All right, cool.
Like,
I'm going to go back here.
yeah,
That's cool. Thanks.
cool. You know, like, so basically, like, this had all been ruled by our boy Frederick II. So the Hohenstaufen dynasty kind of dies out as a result of this, and so the peninsula kind of gets divided up into more or less independent political units. And so like then you sort of get like Henry of Luxembourg, who's right before Louis, who's like right, like then you have kind of like different things going on. So for example, our good friends the Guelphs and Ghibellines are fucking kicking the fuck off in like Florence and around the joint. So you've got like the pro-imperial and the pro-pope factions. You've got like Naples as a completely different bit. It's just like, yeah, whatever, brah. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, this is not going to happen, right? So what happens as a result of this is you get Louis the Bavarian, who is like, okay, well, I'm going to come in from the north, but this is like a German, right? A Bavarian. And all he can really do is kind of intervene in the northern things without kind of like getting anything done. Louis never even manages a Roman coronation, which is how like politically fractured everything is at the time. Right. So, which is also part of the reason why Charles IV managed to kind of like sneak in there and, you know, like become an anti-emperor more or less. And he eventually does get a Roman coronation. Right. But the point is that there are massive fucking political rifts that are happening on the Italian peninsula at the time. And so there's a lot to play for. So you need to kind of like keep in mind that there's all this political stuff going on at the same time that there are all these kind of like, what does it all mean questions floating around about the church.
Yeah. And so in addition to that, we mentioned it, but, you know, this is Holy Roman Imperial territory. We got many references to the empire and various things within it. Just before this time, the empire, you know, began its, you know, slow decline as an imperial entity with the Great Interregnum from 1247 to 1273. You know, obviously the Habsburgs would, you know, become extremely powerful and would, you know, rule a decent size of the globe at one point. But, you know, as like the rule of an emperor, you know, this is when it kind of starts to become lessened. It starts to devolve a little. And so, yeah. So, like, can you take us through, like, in 1327, who is the Holy Roman Emperor? What's going on? Is there an anti-king, you know, floating around? What are we looking at here?
So we definitely, at this point in time, we've got our Louis IV, the Bavarian. Right. Sometimes Ludwig the Bavarian. Depends on who's asking. Right. And he was a controversial choice. Okay. A number of reasons. First of all, he got elected at the same time as his cousin. Whoops. Oopsie. Frederick the Fair. Right. By different electors. And now you got to understand that at this point in time, in theory, you need to have all 7 imperial electors elect you in order to become the king of the Romans. And then after you become king of the Romans, the Pope is supposed to crown you, at which point in time you become the Holy Roman Emperor, right? That's the short. But they kind of like split the electors. So you've got Frederick the Fair, who's a Habsburg, on one side, and you've got Louis on the other. And it kind of went down along sort of like German nobility lines versus church lines, right? So, so basically, like Louis had been the Duke of Upper Bavaria, and like his brother was the Margrave of Brandenburg and the Count of Palatinate and Rhine. So that's like 2 of the votes. You know, so there's a lot of wheeling and dealing, right? So, basically it's a contested election, right? And then as a result of this, like, okay, I'm trying to like slow down and get all of our guys right. Charles the Fourth's dad, John of Luxembourg, or John the Foreigner, as we call him in the Czech lands, was supposed to be one of the electors because he was the king of Bohemia at the time. But he was considered too young by some people and too powerful for others, right? Like, so they were like, okay, well, we don't want like him involved. So they're like, we'll get Philip the Fair out here because he's going to be kind of like tractable because he's just a Habsburg, right? And then like the people who were pro John then were like, well, we're going to vote for Louis because fuck you, right? Like, so there was like all this like question about it, right? So basically you don't get everyone, and so there's like this question about who the fuck is actually the emperor. Now, I will say that I think Louis does the best impression of one, right? And like he does seem to be the emperor and like the guy that people kind of like accept. But Philip the Fair does ponce around and pout a lot, and the church isn't happy. All right, and John doesn't really dig it. He's like lecturing John and being like, go back to Rome. And he's like, you go to Rome. It's so fucking good, you know, like I'll see you going down there to even get crowned or whatever. And so there's all this kind of like back and forth, at which point in time, my favorite thing ever happens, which is Louis gets his own pope.
Yeah, woo, let's go.
And I like him a lot. The anti-pope Nicholas V is cool as shit. He's a Franciscan, and I'm like pro-Franciscan, and like a bias about that. And like, so he's like, oh, well, I'm getting my own pope with Franciscans and like whatever.
Yeah.
And then he gets Louis crowned, right? And he's like, haha, there you go. Like, now I am officially the pope and there's nothing you can do about it. The papacy is fucking furious about this. And then eventually Charles IV gets elected kind of as an anti-emperor, but then Louis dies, has an aneurysm on a bear hunt. And then everyone's like, well, I guess it's just Charles, whatever, dude. But like the point is, it's fucking wild. It's complex. And, you know, it's difficult to keep all of your like threads neatly parted here because everyone's so mad, right?
Yeah. It's, there's a lot. He and Frederick the Fair are fighting for a while and then they make up. Then they kind of become friends and have like a little co-ruler thing, which is cute. Nicholas, I do find it funny that Nicholas is crowned as the anti-pope, but before he dies, he like goes to the Pope and he goes to John the 22nd. It's like, hey man, can I get some forgiveness here? My bad.
Oh, oopsies.
Can we can we do something about that?
Yeah, it's funny because so I wrote the blog post the other week about how mad I was that I couldn't take pictures of this one mural in Bologna. Right. And I wasn't allowed to take pictures of it. And part of the reason that they're mad about it is that like they're like, stop taking pictures of how sexy the lust people are. And I'm like, no. But up at the top, people who are being tormented are people who've like sinned against the church. And Nicholas V's up there.
Oh,
like
got his ass.
Yeah. So he's like up with the schismatics and he's being torn into pieces by demons and having his arms eaten. So that's cool. Yeah.
That's cool as shit.
Yeah.
They all kind of fight. John the 22nd remains Pope in Avignon until he dies.
That is the actual Pope. He was really the Pope.
It's they just like, it's just funny. Like they're just all kind of like fighting and like Who has the, if we're talking about Cicero-papism, who has the advantage right now? Is it Caesar or the Pope, like, in your mind?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think, to be fair, Louis's got the advantage because fundamentally he's got the armies and he controls the most land. And the popes are so fucking mad about it, right? That it's like they go to extraordinary lengths to try to kind of undo this, right? But it still isn't really undone under John. Like, it's Clement who manages to get his foot in the door with our good friend Charles afterwards. So very slightly Louis does, and fundamentally Louis dies as emperor, right? I mean, it's like Charles is going around calling himself the emperor at this point in time, but like people are not buying it, right? Like his nickname was the Pope King or the Priest King, right? And so it's like even when they like manage to do it, it's like, so I think the emperor really does have the advantage. But having said that, both kind of die in the position that they have, and we don't really dispute their claims to that from a historical point. So it's kind of a stalemate, if that makes sense.
It does. I just think it's interesting to, just look at all this, because they do, like, Louis crowns an anti-pope, and Nicholas is the pope, is the anti-pope for a little while, but then he goes and asks forgiveness before he dies, and so there's no anti-pope, and Louis has since been confirmed as the Holy Roman Emperor, like, fully. He's he's not really like combated at that point, and it's just like they just it goes back to this weird like status quo where they're just kind of like, all right, I guess if I have to live with you, I have to live with you. I don't like it, but I'm gonna guess I'm gonna deal with this. And it's just like, like you guys didn't think about doing just like kind of like having like a ceremony where you like shake hands even though you hate each other and be like, yeah, it's fine. They're like, nope. Fucking hated him. Next.
True. Right.
Hated all of them. Fuck off, guys. Yeah.
Get fucked.
Yep. So, moving from a little bit of the political history to just more general stuff. Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. Eleanor. What the fuck? Why did so many people starve? And what did this do to Europe?
Basically, like a lot of people fucking died. Like, they're just like a brackets, like I think it's something like 15% of the population, a lot. And basically what happened is from 1315 to 1317, 3 summers in a row failed, essentially. So it was like it just rained the entire time, and no one could get a fucking crop out of the ground. And so people just died, right? Because that's how it worked. Now, like, even things happened, like kings were reduced to not having white bread. Imagine. No. But, people fucking starved. People resorted to cannibalism. If your crops can't grow, your animals die. So, it was really, really awful. Stunted growth for years. People's physical growth was massively stunted. And this is kind of like a little presaging of the horrors to come when the Little Ice Age kicks in. A little bit later, but not yet. And this gets really forgotten about because we go to talk about the Black Death, but it was an absolutely horrifying event. And also, one of the reasons why people are like, shit, I don't know, world might be ending. Right. So,
yeah, it was in the little, like, there was like a tweener period between the end of the medieval war period, at least for like, Central Western Europe and the North Atlantic. It was a little, it was a little less pronounced. It took a little longer to get to other places, but there was like a tweener period of like 70 to 100 years or so between the end of the medieval warm period and the beginning of the Little Ice Ages, and you're just kind of like. Cool.
Yep.
The temperature is completely changing from what it was, and like you all of a sudden go from being able to grow crops like further up in the mountains and everything to like having like these torrential floods and all your crops being destroyed, and then soon enough you'll be skating on the Thames in in March or whatever it is. So it's like you got that going on, and then that's like affecting people's material lives and how they and like how they survive, like, existential questions, things like that. And you really see the crisis of the 14th century started to come into focus, because on top of that, we have the religious, and because of the setup of Europe, the social order as well being shaken by things. So this isn't one of the big questions, but it is something that goes on in the background, and it is the Inquisition, which had been ongoing since 1184. William of Baskerville has very he seems to be very troubled, very haunted by tortures he saw, burnings that he was a part of, and everything like that. So, like, what's going on with with just the Inquisition at this point? And is the stuff that William's kind of talking about, is this something people were like, inquisitors were like, damn, that was really fucked up, maybe we shouldn't have done that?
Yeah, there is like a lot of like, ooh, oopsie. That kind of
oh, did we do that?
Yeah, that kind of goes down, and these things kind of like kick off with like the Albigensian Crusade, and like the going after the good men and women of Languedoc, right?
Editor's note: Cathars, if you don't remember.
Yes, exactly.
They're commonly called Cathars.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so this stuff kind of like kicks off like this. Oh well, maybe the church should be cops now, or something, right? And it's an interesting one because so initially the people who are really involved with this are like Cistercians, okay? And Cistercians were invented by Bernard of Clairvaux, Abelard's nemesis, and they were invented because they felt like Benedictines had gone soft, right? And so they were like, they are like, we've got this new kind of monk, and we are Cistercians, and we are going to return with a V. And we are going to be real dicks, and like also we're the cops now. Okay. Then in the 13th century, you have the Franciscans get invented, notably by Saint Francis of Assisi, and they are invented for the reason that everyone is like, church seems kind of rich, bit odd. Mm-hmm.
Weird how that works.
Yeah,
huh?
and then and everyone is like, oh, word, yeah, that does seem, and everybody likes that there's like these people who are dedicated to being poor and dedicated to working in cities with people and like alleviating the problems that people have, right? The Franciscans then start getting called in to be inquisitors as well. In particular, Franciscans are, which seems like,
weird,
bit odd, right? And so in particular, you get a lot of Franciscans, and also a lot of Dominicans, who are another kind of one of the poor orders that gets invented, right? So you have these guys who are kind of starting to do church cop shit. You usually get called there. The thing is that I would say about that is this is usually not like the church like going around being like, hey, is there anyone that you'd like us to torture? Usually something goes on and then you call the church cops. Right? So it's like you have kind of like centralized people who do that. You have centralized inquisitors. And what happens, and William talks about this, is that you then like sometimes torture people, sometimes question people, whatever. And then if they get found guilty to the point where you're like, yeah, let's kill these guys, you then hand them over to secular authorities, and then secular authorities kill them, because obviously the church can't kill people. So there's that. The reason why it's important to kind of think about the Franciscans in all of this, and the reason they were set up, is that this also comes across in terms of the questions of apostolic poverty that come up all the time. This woo woo woo, because you also have this group of people called the Fraticelli, so like the little brothers. Right, and they
little guys.
They're only little guys, right?
You wouldn't hit them. They're just little guys.
Only little guys.
And the Pope was like, "Fuck,
I would hit the fuck out of them, right?" And they get invented for the same reason that the Cistercians got invented. Because they were like, I'm afraid the Franciscans are not going hard enough, right? And because the Franciscans were so popular, people immediately started giving them a bunch of money, and they immediately became like incredibly powerful, and immediately like had all this cash. And then everyone was like, I thought, wait, what?
Huh?
Weren't you supposed to not be doing that? And the spiritual Franciscans were like, yeah, you're not supposed to be fucking doing that, guys. Like, what's with all the like inquisitoring and having all the money? I thought that we were out here doing apostolic poverty. And in particular, they insist on what is called the absolute poverty of Christ. So the idea that not only does Christ not own possessions as an individual, the apostles did not hold them in common.
Yeah.
Either. So like no possessions.
So like they didn't own anything. Like
yes.
They showed up, somebody gave them like, some bread or whatever. They thanked them. They didn't have a bowl. They didn't even have a bindle and a stick. Yeah. They were just alone.
Whereas the Franciscans had like justified their gaining all of their things by saying, well, no, Christ and the apostles owned goods in common, just not as individuals. And they imagine the gifts that they are given by people to be a sort of gift exchange, right? So like if you're given money as a Franciscan because you gave a sermon, it's like, oh, well, I gave you the gift of a sermon and you've given me a gift of this money. And that's why it's okay that we have this money now, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, the papacy did not like the spiritual Franciscans, and they were declared heretical by John the 22nd, and they were then inquisitored.
Hunted.
Yeah.
They were, as I think I said earlier, 4 of them were burned at the stake by John in Avignon, and I believe it was 1318, something like that. He finally got tired of it. He decided, he was going to take his ball. He was going home, and he declared them all heretical because, as Eco says in the book, or I guess Adso technically says it, but look, if people are like, hey, why are you guys taking money? And you have like these apostolic orders go like, oh yeah, we shouldn't do that. Well, then people are going to start being like, well, why does the bishop get it? Why does the archbishop get it? Why does the pope live in somewhere so fucking nice? And it's
exactly.
I like, and they're like, and they don't, and that attacks the whole structure of it. Yeah. So okay, that obviously sounds like a big, theological question, but that we know of, did regular people know about this? Were they like, no, we love the Fraticelli, or we don't? People. Or is that something we don't know?
People seem to have liked them. Some people don't, but as a general rule of thumb, ordinary people are really big into apostolic poverty. Actually, but regular people like it, and fancy people don't. Yeah.
And the regular people are like, hey, that
was my guy.
Mending stuff and, giving spiritual counsel or whatever, which is, that's the agreement we've had. Our whole social order is based on this. And the church is like, yeah, but what if we were rich and lived in France? It's like, well, okay, cool. These problems of church wealth will not be issues in the future, assuredly. Anyway, lastly here, of course, Avignon. The papacy moved there, Pope Clement, in 1307. And during this book, we had the rule of John the 22nd. So, we've talked about it a bunch, but Eleanor, what does the move to Avignon mean for the papacy and for Christianity?
Well, everyone's mad. Yeah, they're pissed off. Now, I'm Team Avignon. I would move to Avignon too. Fuck it. Why? You live here. This place on fire. Whatever the shit. Everyone's out of pocket. There's fights all the time, right? And anyway, so they move off to France. Goodbye. Here they go. There's no rule that says a dog can't play basketball, right?
Right.
That's kind of like my thing. Why can't they? But everyone's mad about it because they're like, you're having too much fun in southern France. And the Pope's like, and they were.
And he's like, well, so?
But, they were having, it's just it's not like they weren't being fancy in Rome. But they're like, you go back to Rome where it sucks. And the Popes are like, no. But
there's too many bugs. I don't like the swamp.
Yeah, I'm trying to not get malaria. And they're like, too bad. So anyway,
get fucked, old man.
Yeah, basically, they're like, get your ass back there, and everyone's really mad about it, and they say that it's a sign that the church has gone decadent because they're not living in the shithole, it's just kind of taken as a sign of the profligacy of the papacy as well, because they do proceed to build a really baller, new kind of a papal palace there, and it's cool. So
and then oddly, when they decide to leave Avignon, they build another baller papal palace or they start to build a new one in Rome, and that
Yeah.
causes a lot of other problems. Yeah, as you can see, this is, I mean, like, this is really like a very critical period for when all the stuff that's going to like flow together into the Reformation
Yeah.
and the breakdown of like Europe, in Christendom in general, and Europe as well, is like right here. And it's going to happen after this, obviously, like, a couple decades later, but the Black Death is just going to kick the whole
Oh God, yeah.
risk board over. And yeah, and it's just going to be a shit show, and that's why you get the crisis of the 14th century, folks.
Woo!
Yeah, everything else, just a little more historical background. There are, a lot of references to real people, Michael of Cesena, Ubertino of Casale, just real folks who were active at the time, much like the Inferno. And there is also a single passing reference to the Divine Comedy, which would have been published about 6 years before the events of the Name of the Rose. And this is just something I wondered when I was doing it, but like, Eleanor, how likely do you think it was that like a copy of that would have made it all the way up the peninsula, especially since it was written not in Latin but in Florentine? Like, is that something you might expect, or is it just like
possible?
Okay,
like, I mean, it's not impossible, but right. One of the things that is kind of interesting about it, right, is that like as we remember, our boy Dante is a Guelph, right? And basically, like, the Guelphs are like they are kind of like they get the name Guelph from the Italian version of the House of Welf, who are the Dukes of Bavaria, right? Who are like the Hohenstaufens. So like they that's basically like kind of flagging up that they are like pro-emperor, right? And so because this is a pro-emperor monastery, it'd be more likely that they could get it, because it's like they would side with the Guelphs. So yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was just wondering because, like, I mean, this abbey has like the world's greatest library ever times a million, but like it does seem, it's kind of weird, that like they were like, oh yeah, we got that, it's fine, we've all read it now, it's cool.
Yeah, it's like
no big deal.
Yeah, it's probably just like, to them they would have been like, it's the equivalent of getting a hold of a fantasy book or something, right? Yeah. They're just like, oh, bit of fun.
They're just like, well, this guy's got a great imagination, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then like 100 years later, everybody's like, oh, that's hell for you. And just like, what the fuck?
When did that happen? God, shit.
Holy shit. Yeah. The Inferno became the version of hell so quickly, or so gradually, I hardly even noticed. Yeah, so that's the historical background, and like that was a very like that's a framework of it, because we've obviously talked about it before, but also like this book is extremely concerned with that to an insane degree. It's so then we come to the abbey itself. The unknown abbey that provides the setting, the unnamed abbey that provides the setting for the Name of the Rose, is located somewhere in northwestern Italy, and the outer look and layout are based on the famous Sacra di San Michele, or St. Michael's Abbey, which is near Turin in the Piedmont region. Much like its real-world counterpart, Eco's Abbey is gorgeous. It can be seen for miles, sitting atop one of the many mountain peaks that decorate the Piedmont, though dramatic license really kicks in when it comes to reaching the Abbey. You see, the entirety of Eco's Abbey is built directly onto the edge of a flattened mountain peak, with the outer walls on three sides giving way to sheer rocky cliffs that drop off for hundreds or thousands of feet into the ravine below. The only access to the Abbey is via a lone road snaking up the mountain from the west, sometimes made impassable by the weather. While the real Sacra di San Michele is built into a mountain and features a winding road, the sheer terror-inducing cliffs that Eco imagined aren't there. To be sure, it would still suck to fall off, as basically, as it would basically any building over 2 stories, but it's surrounded by rolling forested hills, not cliffs you'd find in the outside of supervillain's lair. Still, if you see an image of St. Michael's Abbey, you can imagine Eco's Abbey, so we will include an image of it. As for the layout, every part of Eco's Abbey exists within a long curtain wall that wraps all the way around the grounds with a single opening for the road on the western side. Within you'll find everything a monk would need: the church, dorms, the chapter house, the shitter, stables, an infirmary, a smithy, and more. But the biggest and most mysterious piece here is a tall fortified tower that looms ominously over the abbey and the surrounding area. Excuse me. All right, now, one thing I love in movies is when someone is like going through a dialogue, and they're like, within a room you'll find a key. Unlock another. I love it when people do that. And so I'm glad that I get to do this because
live your dream.
The tower, yeah, pretty much. I need to get it so I can read it really fast, like the guy, the architect from The Matrix, the Matrix sequels, the guy who clicks his pen and there's all the TVs all around him. So, he can just talk really fast like that and do it. But the tower overlooks the steepest cliff with the longest fall in the northeastern part of the abbey, and part of its base is incorporated into the outer wall. The tower itself contains 3 floors and has its own set of 4 towers at the top, each of which face one of the 4 cardinal directions. Taken together, the entire structure is known as the Aedificium. The ground floor is normal enough, with a kitchen and mess hall where the monks would congregate to eat. Nothing weird about that. Up next, the first floor is again pretty standard, containing a wide-open scriptorium with tall ceilings and dozens of lovely nook desks where books from the library could be read and copied, with a single staircase, and it has a single staircase leading up to the second floor. Again, seems fine, maybe a bit ostentatious, but nothing that odd here. However, the real mystery begins at the staircase, because the second floor is totally off limits to everyone except the librarian. This probably wasn't that unheard of from time to time, but also wasn't normal custom, as the librarian would usually have some helpers at least, because it's going to take a while to get through this library, as you'll see. Stranger still is the fact that the Aedificium library is a maze, intentionally built to confuse any unauthorized entrant. Someone at the abbey was apparently quite concerned about the impressionable monks being led astray by hidden knowledge contained in the books. At the outset of the story, the secrets of the library are known only to the librarian, but luckily, we were able to access some forbidden knowledge of our own in the form of the layout of the labyrinthian library. A map will be included in the show notes, obviously. Anyway, the library is composed of 56 interconnected rooms surrounding a central octagonal area. There are no hallways in the library. Of the 56 rooms, 54 contain a scroll on which is written a verse from the Book of Revelation in Latin. The first letter of the verse is then assigned to represent that room, and, when read together, the letters from adjoining rooms spell out the name of the geographical region from which the books in that part of the library originate. Example: the North Tower contains books from England, so the letters of the rooms can be arranged to spell Anglia, the Latin name for England. 2 rooms lack letters. The easternmost room on the East Tower contains a small chapel for prayer, as it faces Jerusalem, obviously, and the central room of the South Tower, called the Finis Africae, which contains the most forbidden books of all and can only be accessed via a hidden door. All of the rooms hold shelves of books and manuscripts except for the chapel room. If we take a bird's eye view of the Aedificium, the rooms are arrayed as follows. The 4 cardinal direction towers each contain 8 total rooms. A central room that is surrounded on all sides by 7 smaller rooms, 5 of which are situated on the outside of the tower, with 2 more in the main outer walled line of rooms. There are 8 more large rooms along the main outer wall, 2 rooms each between each tower. Within the outer wall rooms, there is another ring of 16 much smaller rooms that totally enclose the central octagonal area. 4 towers with 8 rooms each is 32, plus 8 is 40, plus 16 is 56. There are no hallways, so each room is directly connected to the other rooms via doors. However, the number of doors contained in each room is not uniform. Most rooms have either 2 or 3 doors, while one room has 5 doors, and 4 rooms have only a single door. The staircase leading up from the scriptorium is the only access point to the library and is located in the central room of the eastern tower. All of this makes navigating the library both time-consuming and frustrating. To travel from the staircase in the central room of the east tower to the central room of the west tower, for instance, requires going through 15 rooms. The longest trip, by my count, involves going from the staircase to the northernmost room of the north tower, which requires passing through 22 rooms on the way. So imagine how long it takes a single crotchety old man to walk up the stairs, go through the rooms, get the book you need, walk back through the rooms, and back down the stairs again. Eleanor, why?
But
why?
This is not real, you know.
No, I know it's not real, but like, why? Like,
I don't know. I think Echo's showing off.
Oh, he's got to be.
Like, I have to look at the picture every time I think about this.
I do. I'm looking at it right now. I'm going to post it.
Yeah, because I'm just like, okay. I mean, like, suffice to say, this is not how it's usually done. So it's like, you know, this is...
like, if you...
Yeah, this is just, you know, for the benefits of, you know, the book. Like, I assure you, no.
It's so crazy. Like, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. Like, it's... I can't, like, it's hard. Like, it took me a while to be able to write that, and I had to rewrite it like 3 times because every time I did it was just like, no, this doesn't work. I don't like that, you know. It's frustrating, and every time, like, I would just have to sit there and stare at this fucking thing because, like, this is so confusing. And like, coming up with this and coming up with like the standardized way that you're doing it, and also you're kind of like, oh yeah, you can spell out the words of like different parts, different regions from these words, and you're just like, man, Echo, like,
monks might. They're wild, you know. It's too clever
by half, but at the same time, I'm just like, I'm impressed. I'm just like, oh well, I guess you got me there. Like, I don't. It's really, it's a lot, and we'll post a picture of the labyrinth itself. But it's just like, suffice to say, like, you were supposed, the reader and anyone who gets up there is supposed to be overwhelmed by this. It's intentionally like this, like, and so I guess the question I would have, because obviously the Aedificium is not a real thing, but were abbeys this concerned with people being like corrupted by the knowledge of these books? Like, was that like an overriding concern, or like, you know, maybe a couple of them were but not really?
Sometimes the thing is, sometimes there are like occult tomes, right, or things that are considered bad, but they, as a general rule of thumb, libraries err on the side of having them. And it is true that they would just be like, no, you may not see it. Yeah. Like, unless you're like an advanced scholar or like sufficiently high up in the hierarchy. And it's because monks are playing silly buggers all the time. Like, monks are constantly attempting to do magic. Like, all the time they're attempting to do magic. They like get a hold of some book, and then they try to like summon a demon horse to take them to India, where they'll get laid. Like, you know, they're always doing stuff like this, and like we know this to be true based on their own accounts, or like them writing in margins, I tried this and it worked, or whatever. And it's like, no, it didn't, homie. But like, okay. So the way that you get around that is by like restricting access to some books, and you know, most libraries wouldn't be necessarily open access. It would be like, you know, like going to the British Library now, where you'd be like, can I see this? And they'll go, yeah, hold on 1 second. And they'll go get it. Right. And you'd have a team. Sometimes you have libraries where the books are chained. That's really common. Or it's like you can look at it, but you can't take it. And that sort of thing. Yeah. But it is, there are some concerns about monks playing silly buggers. Does it go to this level? No. Is that something that is a concern of theirs? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like, I mean, this is like it's obviously not because they because the Dan Brown books aren't really that useful. But this is the like puzzle box that like Dan Brown is like groping for in the darkness, where it's just like, here is here's this room, here's a tower, it's got 56 rooms, it's got this, it's got that, and you're just like, fuck, man, did you just like, how long did it take you to come up with this? Like, good God. And like, you could tell like in the picture, like, just going between these rooms would be such a pain in the ass. You're just like, Jesus fucking Christ.
Completely. So yeah.
It's that is it's pretty much the introduction that we're going to do today. It's we'll come back next month when we do it, and we'll talk more. We'll talk about the characters, and we'll get into the first day and everything like that, and see what we're looking at here, and see what grisly, untimely murders we can discover. I think that's good for today, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, God bless you, listeners. We did take you on a long one.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of info here. We know there was there's just a lot going on. But that is Eco. If you're going to follow along, you're going to take him at face value, or at least something close to face value, and you're just like following it along. You're like, okay, cool, like, give me this insane library that looks like, it's like straight out of the best version of the Library of Alexandria or whatever, in terms of like the books it has and the tomes and all this sort of stuff. And, at the same time, but, if you follow it through and you're not just like, oh yeah, like somebody's going to do this like stupid labyrinth that's so like hard to manage or whatever, if you
shut up, nerd, then shut
up. And then you get a really cool story. Along with it. Yeah. So thank y'all for listening. Thank you for subscribing. We'll be back with more next month. Don't know what the other bonus episode at the end of the month is going to be this time, but we'll be back with something towards the end of May with that. Thank y'all again. You guys are great. We really appreciate it. And we will we'll see you next time.
Love you guys. Bye.